So I'm from, thank you. So I'm from Korea University. All the way flying from Korea to attend this. Later, June, I met at the IS. I'm so glad to be here. Next page. So research background is job seekers, especially millennials. They care about potential employers, ESG, CSR, sustainability. So companies maybe try to manipulate job seekers and their image. But at the same time, every company does CSR and CSI, corporate social responsibility at the same time. No company does good all the time. So this is my research background. And still, I question, how do stakeholders perceive the negative behaviors of the firm, which is so active CSR history, actually. They were really active. They promote their CSR really hard. But actually, a negative event happens. And there are many researches regarding whether it's a buffering effect or backfire effect. I wonder about your opinion on that. And there's a very interesting case, not just in Volkswagen, but in POSCO, one of the largest firms in Korea. So they are like receiving many awards of the ESG internationally. But currently there was a big issue about the sexual harassment within the company, and the way the company dealt with the issue was not appropriate. They were actually strategically silenced so that they can legally probably not taking responsible about that. And later then they apologized, but still people really have criticized them a lot. While you are receiving a lot of awards, you are doing it, you are not doing it properly. And then I think in my opinion they might perceive the CSR or ESG or sustainable strategy of the POSCO, the firm, not as genuine. Maybe they just see it as a strategic way or constructive those kind of groups. Okay, so CSR has positive impact on job seekers, and CSI, corporate social responsibility, has a negative effect for the company for job seekers. It's very seems helpful. But research gap there is first, most prior research has focused only on the effect of CSR or CSI not at the same time. The second point is that inconsistent information on CSR and CSI is not adequately addressed in the attribution process, because only when the CSR is perceived as genuine and CSI is seen as showing their true characteristic, it has effect. If there is enough explanation that it may not have effect. Third, I looked into the individual traits, moral identification, moral perspective, moral identity of the individual in this process. So research question is how job seekers with different personality traits attribute the company's inconsistent behavior with CSR, CSI, and it affect their attitudes toward the company. So there are theories that I refer to. Stereotype contents, model information processing theory, attribution process, social identity. Based on that, I developed a hypothesis that previous CSR history may affect perception of firm warmth. And firm warmth, once the people, job seeker, perceive the firm as warm, and then it leads them to attribute or perceive the motive of the CSR is genuine, more genuine. They are warm. They are relational, they are for the society. Yeah. But if they perceive the CSR as profit-driven or stakeholder-driven, then it may not lead to a positive attitude. The first hypothesis is like that. I'm doing experimental design and research by the way. And so I give another situation that CSI currently happens, suddenly happens in a certain way. And in that situation, because people have negative bias and business bias, and also previous CSR history heightened their expectation about the firm, they're will doing CSR continuously. It may have a very backfiring effect, a negative effect on the attitude. So I come up with the present CSI will moderate positive effect of higher CSR history. the motive, and then how the job seeker perceives the genuinity of the CSR motive will affect their attitude in response to the organization, and also job pursuit intention. So this is hypothesis 3, leading to the attraction to organization. And finally, I looked into the moral aspect of the job applicants, that if job seekers wishing to belong to the ethical organization, which is referred as moral identification, it may affect this process as well. So whole research model looks like this, and I did experiments. This was Korean 260 job seekers, and I randomly assigned the scenario on 2 previously CSR3 weak or strong by 2 scenario, present CSR continues to CS3, CSR or suddenly CSI event happens. And then, for the CSI history, CEO's remarks, press release, investor relation reports, and internal policy of the company. And for the current event of CSR or CSI, whether they are actually doing social good by employing disabled employees enough and treating them well internally. So that was my scenario. And I did manipulate it and then check the follow-up out. And then the data shows that hypothesis 1, which is strong CSR history lead to firm warmth and genuine motive, it worked. The second scenario, the second hypothesis, which is about the moderation effect of CSI, worked well. So you see that if the company is doing present CSI IR, which is in the below, it actually how much the firm actively engaged previously CSR history didn't really affect it, so it lowered. But at the same time, the slope doesn't show any difference. So which shows the current event is really important, not the previous histories. And hypothesis 3 worked well. So it shows that it leads to attraction of the not just the motive, attribution of motive, but also people's attitude toward the firm, and also job pursuit intention. And finally, the final hypothesis, which is about the moral identification level of job seekers, showed that the higher the job seekers' moral identification level, the effect is stronger, but the lower the identification level, then it didn't show any difference. It means that people would not care. There are people who would not care about the current previous histories. But for those people who care about meaningful work, meaningfulness in the workplace, possible job seekers, they care much about that. Yes. And there are theoretical contributions and practical implications. And then I actually want to introduce about my further studies, including that. After that, I wondered how to deal with it. Because every company does a CSI. Then my question was, how then the company can communicate to keep their perception of genuine CSR motive to the job seekers. Because I see in a lot of cases which the companies not really doing well. So there are 3 crisis communication strategies: strategy silence, and apologia, which seems a little bit apologetic, but at the same time is a bit of self-defense. In case many companies doing this way. And the third one is sympathy, emotional crisis communication, which is about really being a member of that victim and also apologizing, but not in a hard style or very official way, but also in an unofficial way, an emotional way, being one of them. So basically, so I wonder the effect of CSI would be moderated again by the crisis communication. So I put 3 scenarios regarding the company, how company communicate after the event. And I'm doing that in pilot studies in Korea and also in the US. And currently it shows that emotional communication works at the high level, which I think not many companies are doing it. But threat intolerance is the worst case, definitely. And apologia, which is in many cases, seems better than threat intolerance, but less than emotional communication. Yeah, so I'm pursuing this study further, and I'm working with actually POSCO, and maybe that's a very inconvenient case for them, but because they are pushing corporate citizenship really hard, also they're presenting the AOM about their corporate citizenship. But I want to exhibit the inconvenient dark side of their doing things and try to make a better communication. Yeah, so that's all of my study. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. Very interesting. I just have a question about this. I wonder if there's, a danger of like a selection bias here, because maybe that you can use emotional communication when the irresponsibility is not particularly bad, or so maybe that the nature of the the infraction drives the kind of response, and so it's not just that a company can choose between these, but they might be quite limited in what sort of response they can make based on what they do.
It's a very good point. Actually, that's a very important point. So in this scenario, I only focus on the negative event, which is very clear that the company is doing it responsibly. It's their bad. So after the scenario, I measure the corporate responsibility and control it, so that make sure that every respondent sees that negative event as a irresponsible behavior of the company, not from any other circumstances. Which,
What about maybe controlling for the type of, like what they do wrong? You know what I mean? Like the possibility of,
there are different levels of irresponsible behaviors and different levels of perception of corporate hypocrisy, in which corporate can escape or inescapable. But in this case, I only focus on inescapable. But in a later study, maybe this is going to further my study.
Thank you for the presentation, and I'm a little bit confused because like studies I used in my research and staff studies about intrinsic motivation, self-based motivation, and it seems to be the attraction to organization plays a role, I want to say, and could you explain it? In my eyes, now it's a contradiction, because if you are unmotivated from intrinsic way, they don't need control, they don't need punishment, all the things. Which role plays this attraction to organization? Do you think that as organization simulate some kind of activity of corporate activity to attract the workers, or how do you do it? I'm confused. I'm sorry.
I think that question is because of my research method or experimental design. So in the first stage, I explained that to the respondents that the company has long been putting their efforts in CSR stories, and then I measure from warmth and genuine CSR motive, which shows that many of the respondents think that because they are doing it for a long time, whether it's an environmental, social. In this scenario, maybe I did a social issue. And then in the later stage, I give another scenario that suddenly the newspaper released about it. And then I measured it again, which shows different level from one and different level of genuine CSR motive. So, intrinsic motive of CSR, for me, it's a genuine CSR motive, which only has a positive effect on attitudes and perception of respondents, not strategic CSR or stakeholder-driven forced CSR.
Something else. On your study, so this is comparison between different generation and
Yeah.
in the same generation about attitude to work and to cooperation and so on. And we can see this attitude are changed and early for 50 years it was very important, this attraction to organization. It was part of my identity as a worker.
Yeah.
It's very important, very crucial. And now it seems to be, I don't know, this is it seems to be so that this part of motivation doesn't matter to go. And in new research, it seems to be, in contrary, very important how the worker can be really attracted to organization. The question is it parallel to my feeling is this attraction to organization is much more important as earlier. Is it my mistake? Have I misunderstood it? Can you tell something about it?
I think I'm not fully understanding your opinions and questions, so maybe after this session I will try to understand better in a better way. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
You think you're still doing the studies. I have one question about the crisis communication, and if you have any intentions in the future to also link that to press releases about actions that are done, because the communication linked to an apologetic action might be really interesting for understanding.
Yeah, that's a very good comment. In current stage, actually, I did not differentiate the actual action, actual policy after that, because I just give scenario that the firm is anyway like following up and they're making it better way. Because if the company is not doing anything, it's a different level of their response, different from the communication level. So I just presume that the company they are taking the very same level of response. I mean, in the actual behavior, their policy following up the negative event, but in a different level, different form of crisis communication. But if I just put that suggestion as a fourth maybe alternate scenario, then it might be probably the best.
I think it might be interesting to sort of control for different perceptions of how apologies land.
Yeah.
So it's not just the communication, there's also the personal understanding of when is an apology legitimate or feels acceptable.
Okay, that's a very good suggestion. Yeah. Maybe I'll ask again. There, I think.
So, what I probably just missed that you controlled. How do you expose someone to a strategic silence response in crisis communication advocacy? What does that look like in that anecdote?
Yeah, that's a good one. Actually, I give the very exact statement from the postcode. And so at the same stage, there's further silence. So he was not responding to it was like doing the business as usual. It was after that he was criticized as his busy schedule of flying Europe and US for his business while in this crisis. So I just give a brief explanation that what the CEO is doing. Yeah. And for the second one, I just put the very same statement from the company. For the third one, I just referring from other literature that made sense.
Was the strategic silence almost a control?
Control. Yeah, it sounds like it's just not doing anything.
And then, just out of curiosity, do they hire a crisis communications firm to tell them to be silent?
Inside of
In this case?
I don't know exactly what happened in the inside, but my perception is that in most cases, PR or in this kind of negative events, I think they probably talk to the legal department of the firm, in my perception, so that they can not be sued, and they have a room for defend their cases in the court, because there are many NGOs and civil society and press that bring up issues. So I think that's a not good strategy for them to only consult with the legal department and attorneys. Yeah, they need communication strategies.
When you go back to your model, you mentioned that there were some respondents who didn't care about CSR.
Oh, yeah.
Was there a certain percentage of respondents who didn't care?
Percentage. In terms of moral identification, I measured the 7 Likert measure,
Okay.
which shows probably the mean was probably more than 5%. So many people actually perceive them as being eager to a member of Ethica, but slightly different, like 5 to 7 or 4 to 7.
Okay.
But interesting thing was that, so I would answer that most of the people actually answer that in that way, but still the interesting thing is that there is a difference between 5 and 7. Yeah.
There's a very old communications model called the elaboration likelihood.
Yes, yes.
It's, you know, whether something's cognitive or whether it depends on peripheral cues.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people unfortunately don't use the cognitive side for this kind of decision making, and peripheral cues may actually influence them more.
Yeah.
What other people are saying, what's in the media, what their friends think, what other people who work there
Yeah.
think. And suddenly it should be the most important cognitive decision, or one of the most important of our lives, is the job we take. We're actually looking at others. And kind of go back to those examples of Uber. People knew what was going on at their house. People knew what was going on, but they took peripheral cues from other places. So I think I love this distinction between firm warm, which is sort of that peripheral side, and the genuine CR motive, which is like the cognitive side. But as you go forward, the next sort of step, think about the effects of peripheral cues on people's perceptions, and it can be overwhelming.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. Actually, in Korea, it's very interesting to see that in many cases, celebrities are doing, in many cases, all the celebrities doing illegal stuff, like drunk driving or some sexual abuse stuff.
Right.
And then Instagram, they post pictures of their writing in handwriting style, not typewriting. So just like you said, like peripheral cues. So they show that like even in a YouTube video, they all wear like black and trying to be really like sincere and serious. So actually, when I first got this idea about the emotional response, I thought about like following their cases. Like companies not handwriting, companies like CEOs are not, like being the CEO or chairman in front of the camera, they apologize. They're being postural, apologetic things. But I think I want to challenge that. I think my motivation in here is that you want to be more humane if you pursue CSR and ESG or sustainability. You cannot just strategically communicate things in a legally way, but probably sometimes you need to try. You need to show people that you try. Yeah. But so it's a very. I think people's perception regarding corporate hypocrisy. That's my main research motivation. How to cope with that?
Oh, fantastic. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I'll definitely trying to go deeper.
We're out of time, so thank you. Thank you.